Welcome to Dark Mysteries. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying stories, I have one question. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. If you want more nights filled with horror, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, dim the lights and step into the darkness. Marcus Rodriguez had worked on passenger ships for over 12 years, but nothing could have prepared him for his job on the Carnival Eternity. The ship was enormous, carrying 4,000 passengers and 1,500 crew members. However, what caused even experienced sailors to request transfers were the crew cabins located on the 13th deck. Yes, I believe anything and anywhere with the number 13 is unlucky. Marcus was about to understand why the cruise company paid triple the usual wage to anyone willing to work on that deck after midnight. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Your support is incredibly important to us. Officially, Deck 13 didn't exist. Like many ships, the Eternity skipped from Deck 12 to Deck 14 for superstitious passengers. But crew members knew better. Deck 13 was real, housing auxiliary systems, storage, and crew quarters for the engineering staff. Marcus was assigned cabin 13-147, and from his first night, he understood why the previous occupant had abandoned ship at the last port without collecting his final paycheck. The sounds started at exactly 2 a.m. Not the normal creaking of a ship at sea, but footsteps. Deliberate, measured footsteps walking the corridor outside his cabin. Marcus checked the first night, finding the hallway empty. The second night, he stayed in bed, listening as the footsteps stopped directly outside his door. The handle turned slowly, testing the lock. On the third night, the footsteps came from inside his cabin. Marcus reported it to his supervisor, Chief Engineer Thompson, who'd been with the company for 20 years. Thompson's face went pale, and he pulled Marcus into his office, checking that the door was locked before speaking. "Listen carefully," Thompson said. "Deck 13 has rules that weren't made by the cruise line. Never leave your cabin between 2 and 4 a.m. If you hear knocking, don't answer. If you hear your name being called, don't respond. And whatever you do, never, ever go to cabin 13-131. Marcus asked why, but Thompson just shook his head. The Eternity wasn't always called that. She was the Ocean Dream until 1987. That's when it happened. Cabin 13-131. A family of 4 booked for a Caribbean cruise. They never made it to the first port. The story came out in pieces from different crew members. The Hartley family, parents and 2 children, had been found in their cabin 3 days into the cruise. But they weren't dead, they were changed. Standing in the corners of the room, facing the walls, completely unresponsive. When security tried to move them, they discovered the truth. The family's feet had merged with the floor, their flesh fused with the ship's steel. They were still alive, still breathing, but they had become part of the vessel itself. The cruise line covered it up, of course, claimed it was a gas leak, compensated the families, destroyed the records. But they couldn't remove the Hartleys. Every attempt to cut them free resulted in screams that echoed through the entire ship, and the wounds would heal instantly, flesh and metal becoming one again. So they sealed cabin 13-131, welded it shut, and renamed the ship. But the Hartleys were still there, still standing in the corners, still breathing. And at night, they walked. Marcus didn't believe it until he saw the footage. Thompson had access to security cameras that weren't supposed to exist, cameras monitoring Deck 13. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. 2 weeks prior. 4 figures walking the corridor. A family, parents and 2 children. Except they moved wrong, gliding more than walking, their feet never quite leaving the floor. And their faces were smooth, featureless, as if the details had been erased. "They're looking for others," Thompson explained. "Others to join them. To become part of the ship. Every person who's disappeared from Deck 13, every crew member who's gone missing over the years, they're all here. In the walls, in the floors. The Eternity isn't just a ship anymore. It's alive and it's hungry." Marcus lasted 2 more weeks. He followed the rules, stayed in his cabin during the forbidden hours, ignored the knocking and calling. But the ship was learning his routines, his weaknesses. It started showing him things. His daughter's voice calling from the air vents. His ex-wife's perfume in the corridors. Photos of his family appearing under his door, but wrong, distorted, as if taken from inside the walls. The breaking point came when Marcus found his roommate, Carlos, standing in the corner of their cabin at 3 a.m., just standing there facing the wall, breathing steadily. Marcus tried to wake him, shake him, but Carlos's feet wouldn't move. When Marcus looked closer, he saw why. The flesh around Carlos's ankles was already beginning to merge with the floor, skin taking on the texture of painted steel. Marcus ran. He grabbed his emergency bag and ran straight to the bridge, demanding to speak to the captain. But the captain knew. They all knew. This was the price of running the Eternity. Feed Deck 13 a few crew members each year, and the ship ran perfectly. No mechanical failures, no accidents, impossibly good fuel efficiency. The ship took care of itself as long as it was fed. "You can leave at the next port," the captain said calmly. "We won't stop you. But know this. Once you've lived on Deck 13, you're marked. The ship knows you now, and ships travel all the world's oceans. You'll never be able to set foot on another vessel without it calling to you." Marcus left at Miami, never looked back. He works construction now, far inland, as far from the ocean as he could get. But sometimes, on quiet nights, he hears it. The sound of waves against a hull, the creak of metal corridors, and footsteps, always footsteps, coming closer. The Carnival Eternity still sails, still carries thousands of passengers who have no idea what travels with them. Deck 13 is still there, hidden from public plans, but very real. And in cabin 13-131, sealed behind welded steel, the Hartley family stands in their corners, waiting. They've been joined by others now. Dozens of crew members who stayed too long, who didn't follow the rules, who answered when their names were called. If you ever cruise on the Eternity, count the decks. You'll see they skip from 12 to 14. But at night, if you listen carefully, you can hear it. The footsteps on the deck that doesn't exist. The calling voices of those who became part of the ship. And if you're very unlucky, you might hear your own name being called. Don't answer. Never answer. Because the ship is always hungry, and Deck 13 always has room for more. Sophie Chen had been a cabin steward on the Royal Paradises for 3 years, when she was assigned to maintain the suites on Deck 3. Below the waterline, with no windows, these were the cheapest accommodations on the ship. But Suite 3012 hadn't been booked in 5 years. Sophie was about to discover that it had never been empty. The head of housekeeping, Mrs. Winters, gave Sophie specific instructions about Suite 3012. Clean it daily, but never before 10 a.m. or after 3 p.m. Always knock 3 times, wait 10 seconds, then knock twice more before entering. Never move the furniture, especially the bed. And most importantly, always set the dinner table for 1, even though no one would eat there. Sophie thought it was some cruise line superstition, like how airlines skip row 13. But she followed the rules, entering the suite with her cleaning cart each day at exactly 10 a.m. The suite was always pristine, as if no one had touched it since her last cleaning. Except for small things. The bathroom towels, neatly folded, would be slightly damp. The bed, perfectly made, would have a depression in the mattress as if someone had been sitting there. And the dinner setting from the previous day would be disturbed. The silverware moved, the napkin unfolded. After 2 weeks, Sophie's curiosity got the better of her. She checked the ship's booking system. Suite 3012 showed as occupied. Had been for 5 years. The passenger's name was listed as Margaret Holloway. Boarding date, March 15, 2019. The same Margaret Holloway who had supposedly gone overboard during a storm that year, her body never recovered. Sophie confronted Mrs. Winters, who reluctantly told her the truth. Margaret Holloway had gone overboard, yes, but 3 days later, housekeeping found her in Suite 3012, sitting at the dinner table, soaking wet despite the room being dry. Security was called, but when they arrived, the suite was empty. The next day, she was back. And the next. Always wet, always at the dinner table, always gone when anyone else arrived. The cruise line tried everything. They changed the locks, sealed the vents, posted guards. But Margaret always returned. Eventually, they realized she wasn't hurting anyone. She just sat at her table, water pooling beneath her chair, staring at nothing. So they made a deal. They would maintain her suite, set her table, leave her alone, and she would stay in 3012. But Sophie made a mistake. One day, running late, she entered the suite at 3:47 p.m. 17 minutes past the deadline. Margaret was there, sitting at the table as described. But she wasn't alone. The room was full of water, impossible amounts of it, defying physics as it hung in the air like invisible aquarium walls. And in that water, Sophie saw them. Other passengers. Dozens of them. All the people who had gone overboard over the years, floating, eyes open, watching. Margaret turned to look at Sophie, and when she spoke, water poured from her mouth. "You're late," she gurgled. "The dinner party is about to begin." Sophie tried to run, but the water followed her, seeping under the door, crawling up the walls. She could hear them behind her, wet footsteps on the carpet, dozens of drowned passengers walking through the corridors. They followed her to the crew quarters, to the mess hall, always just out of sight but leaving puddles of seawater that shouldn't exist this far above the waterline. That night, Sophie barricaded herself in her cabin and called her supervisor. But Mrs. Winters wasn't surprised. "You broke the rules," she said simply. "Now you've been invited." They know you can see them. Every person who's ever gone overboard. They're all still here, Sophie. The ocean doesn't take them. The ship keeps them. Down below the waterline, in spaces that aren't on any blueprint. Sophie learned the horrible truth about cruise ships. Every vessel has a percentage of passengers who go overboard. Suicides, accidents, murders. The statistics are hidden, but crew members know. And what crew members don't know is that these passengers don't leave. The ocean is vast and empty and cold, but the ships are warm and familiar. So the drowned return, gathering in the spaces below the waterline, in cabins that exist between the real ones. The Royal Paradise had been sailing for 20 years. In that time, 43 passengers had gone overboard, and all 43 were still on board, living in the impossible spaces below Deck 3. During the day, they stayed hidden, but at night, they wandered, looking for others to join their endless cruise. Sophie tried to finish her contract. Just 2 more months. But the invitations grew more insistent. Wet handprints appeared on her mirror. Her cabin filled with the smell of salt and decay. She would wake to find herself standing at the rail, looking down at the dark water, hearing voices calling her to jump, to join them, to attend the dinner party that never ended. She broke on the 17th night. Sophie ran to the bridge, demanded to see the captain, threatened to go to the media. The captain, a gray-haired woman named Morrison, listened patiently, then showed Sophie something that destroyed her sanity: the ship's real manifest. Not the one the passengers saw, but the true count. The Royal Paradise was listed as carrying 3,000 passengers and 1,200 crew. But the actual sensors, the weight distributions, the water consumption, all showed different numbers. 3,043 passengers. The 43 who had gone overboard were still being counted by the ship's systems, still consuming resources, still there. "We can't get rid of them," Captain Morrison explained. "Every cruise ship has them. The drowned who won't leave. As long as we follow the rules, they stay below the waterline. But when someone breaks the rules, when someone acknowledges them, they get bolder. They start recruiting." Sophie left the ship at the next port, but it was too late. She'd been marked. Every time she goes near water now, she sees them, reflected in puddles, in rain on windows, in the steam of her shower. The drowned passengers of the Royal Paradise, forever sailing, forever inviting her to join them. The Royal Paradise still sails the Caribbean, still carries thousands of happy tourists. Suite 3012 is still maintained daily, the table still set for 1, or maybe for 43. The housekeeping staff doesn't stay long enough to count anymore. They just follow the rules, clean the room, and try not to notice the wet footprints that appear in corridors that shouldn't exist. And if you ever cruise on the Royal Paradise, and you hear water running in the walls at night, or see puddles in hallways with no explanation, or feel like someone wet is standing behind you at the rail, remember Sophie's warning: don't acknowledge them, don't look for them, and whatever you do, never go below deck 3 after sunset. Because the dinner party is always looking for new guests, and once you're invited, you can never really leave. James Petrov thought working as a chef on the Mediterranean Dream would be his big break. Michelin star training finally paying off, cooking for thousands of passengers cruising the Greek islands. But when he was assigned to prepare the midnight buffet, he learned why the previous chef had jumped ship in Athens, leaving only a warning scrawled in Russian: "Don't feed them after midnight." The Mediterranean Dream was a luxury liner, 5 stars, 2,500 passengers, known for its exceptional cuisine. James was proud to work the main dining room, preparing elaborate meals for discriminating travelers. But every new chef had to do a rotation on the midnight buffet. Just 1 week, they said. Company tradition. The head chef, Lorenzo, gave James unusual instructions for the midnight service. Set up the buffet as normal until 11:45 p.m. Then, at exactly 11:46, add the special service from the locked freezer, the one marked with red tape. Don't look at what's inside the covered trays. Don't lift the lids. Don't ask questions. Just set them out and leave. Return at 4 a.m. to clean up. James followed instructions his first night. The regular passengers enjoyed the standard midnight spread until 11:45, when Lorenzo ushered them all out, claiming a special private event. James wheeled out the covered trays from the red-taped freezer, their contents unusually heavy, the metal ice-cold despite being meant for hot food. He arranged them on the buffet and left as instructed. When he returned at 4 a.m., the buffet was destroyed. Not just eaten, but ravaged. Bones on the floor that were too large to be from any animal the kitchen served. Scratch marks on the metal serving dishes as if from claws. And the smell, rotting seaweed mixed with something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a tomb. James asked Lorenzo what had happened. Lorenzo's face went pale. "They've been with the ship since it was built," he said quietly. the original passengers. From the maiden voyage in 1962, the story came out in pieces. The Mediterranean Dream wasn't the ship's original name. It had been the Aegean Princess, launched with great fanfare for routes through the Greek islands. On its maiden voyage, it had encountered a storm near Santorini. Not a natural storm, the survivors claimed, but something else. A fog that rose from the sea, bringing with it voices in ancient Greek, singing songs that hadn't been heard for millennia. 50 passengers had vanished that night. Not overboard, not from their cabins. They had simply disappeared during the midnight dinner service. Search teams found nothing. But the next night, at midnight, the crew heard them in the dining hall, eating. The sound of 50 people enjoying a meal, chairs scraping, conversations in multiple languages. But the hall was empty. The shipping company tried everything. Exorcists, investigators, even demolishing and rebuilding the entire dining deck. Nothing worked. The 50 passengers continued their midnight feast, invisible but undeniably present, until the company made a deal with something that should have stayed myth. Something old that still swam in the Mediterranean's deepest trenches. Feed the missing passengers, and they would remain invisible. Stop feeding them, and they would become visible again, and hungry for more than what was on the menu. James didn't believe it until the third night, when curiosity overtook him. He stayed hidden in the kitchen, watching through the porthole window as the clock struck midnight. They materialized slowly, like fog condensing into form. 50 passengers in 1960s formal wear, but wrong. Their skin had a bluish-gray tint, like drowned flesh. Their eyes were black, pupilless, and when they smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth, James understood what was really under those covered trays. It wasn't food, it was sacrifice. The cruise line had an arrangement with fishing boats that traveled the darker parts of the Mediterranean. Boats that caught things that weren't quite fish, weren't quite human. Things that shouldn't exist but did, down in the trenches where ancient Greek sailors once threw offerings to gods they feared more than death. The 50 passengers weren't passengers anymore. The thing in the storm had changed them, made them into something that existed between life and death, between human and the creatures that inspired myths of sirens and sea monsters. They needed to feed on their own kind, the half-things caught in the deep. And if they didn't get their proper meal, they would find alternatives among the living passengers. James made it through 5 nights. On the 6th, he made a fatal error. While setting out the covered trays, one slipped, the lid sliding off just enough for him to see inside. The thing on the tray looked back at him with human eyes in a fish's body, its mouth opening and closing, still alive, still aware. It whispered his name. That night, the 50 came early. James heard them in the kitchen at 11:30, searching for him. He hid in the walk-in freezer, the one without red tape, listening to them calling his name in voices that sounded like drowning. When they finally left, he found a message written in frost on the freezer door. "You've seen. Now you're part of the menu." James tried to leave at the next port, but security stopped him. Captain's orders. He had to finish his week. Lorenzo apologized, said it was maritime law, or something older than law. Those who see the true passengers become bound to serve them. 1 week becomes a lifetime becomes eternity. On his last night, James prepared the midnight buffet as usual. But when he opened the red-taped freezer, 1 extra tray sat inside, labeled with his name. Inside, he found a mirror. And in that mirror, he saw himself, but different. Bluish skin, black eyes, teeth too sharp. His reflection smiled and beckoned him to join the feast. James ran, straight off the ship at dawn, never looking back. But he knows he's marked now. Every time he cooks, the food tastes wrong. Every time he looks in a mirror, his reflection has more teeth than it should. And every night at midnight he hears them calling, the 50 passengers of the Mediterranean dream, inviting him to join their eternal feast. The ship still sails, still serves its midnight buffet. The red-taped freezer is still stocked with things that shouldn't exist. And somewhere in the Mediterranean, fishing boats still pull up nets filled with creatures that have human eyes and speak dead languages, delivering them to cruise ships that pay in gold and silence. If you ever sail on the Mediterranean dream, enjoy the excellent cuisine. But leave before midnight. Don't attend the late buffet, and if you hear the sound of 50 people dining in an empty room, don't investigate. Some meals are not meant for the living, and some passengers have been traveling far longer than any ship should sail.